Today let's make this classic old-fashioned tapioca pudding. So many of you enjoyed my rice pudding video, so you're probably going to like this one too. I think the reason why so many people don't like tapioca pudding is because they haven't had it prepared properly. But this recipe uses tried and true techniques that will give you the best taste and texture out there. And with the rising costs of groceries these days, you can make this tapioca pudding quite often and it will never break your bank. After all, they did make it during the Great Depression, but I think it deserves a comeback. So sit back, relax, and let's make some tapioca pudding. Right here I have some tapioca pearls, which comes from the cassava plant, and we have to soak these in some cold water. These pearls are very small, so they're probably only going to take 1 hour to soak, but if your tapioca pearls are larger than this, you may need to soak them overnight. Even though these are very small pearls, I still like to soak them overnight because it just works out better for my schedule. Plus, I find my pudding just turns out better. So go ahead and soak these in plenty of cold water, at least 4 times the amount, and let them soak. You may want to cover this with some sort of a lid so nothing gets in there, and let's see what this looks like after a good overnight soak. So here we are the next morning, and you can see that the tapioca pearls look quite different. They've really expanded in size and they squish very easily between your fingers. Here's the difference between the soaked pearls and the dry, so you can see that soaking is a very important step that you don't want to skip. Now right here I have a sauce pot, and when you're making pudding, I recommend using something with a good heavy bottom. That's going to help prevent any scorching. To this I'm going to add 2 cups of milk, and I like to use full fat milk especially for puddings because it gives it the best texture. Here I have my soaked and drained tapioca pearls. Go ahead and add those in, but try not to splash the milk everywhere like I just did. Sometimes when I'm filming, I kind of forget about being gentle, and if you've seen other videos of mine, you'll know that I have a history of making a mess sometimes. Next, I'm going to add 3 tablespoons of sugar, and we'll be adding an extra tablespoon later in the recipe, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to bring this to a boil over medium-low to medium heat, and just to play it safe, I recommend keeping the heat on medium-low. Tapioca has a tendency to burn very easily, at least in my experience, even with that heavy bottom pot. And even though it may take a few minutes longer to come to a boil, it's better to be safe than sorry. So keep a close eye on that, and in the meantime, I'm going to separate 1 egg. I'm going to put the white into the orange bowl, and I'm going to put the yolk into the little yellow bowl. And I know there's a lot of fancy, cool ways to separate eggs, but I just like to use the 2 shell halves like this. It takes a little practice, but if you happen to get a piece of shell in the yolk or in the white, just use one of the shell halves to scoop it out. Now back to our milk mixture. This hasn't reached a boil yet, but it's about to. And you're going to notice that your tapioca pearls will become transparent and the milk will slowly start to thicken, though it doesn't officially start thickening until it boils. As soon as it does, bring the heat down to low and let it cook for 3 to 5 minutes. And don't forget to stir it frequently to make sure it's not burning on the bottom. Now we have to add our egg yolk into the milk mixture, but we can't just dump it in. We have to temper it in. And that's just a fancy term for slowly adding some of that hot milk mixture into the egg yolk so that it raises the temperature gradually. If you've watched any of my other pudding videos, then you're probably familiar with this. And I feel like this is just the right time to say if you're enjoying this video so far, then let me know by hitting that like button and leave me a comment below telling me what your favorite pudding is. And if you really want to make my day, subscribe to I Cook and Paint and don't forget to hit that little notification bell. That way we can keep cooking these great recipes together. Now, how much of this milk do we have to add before the yolk is fully tempered? Until you have about 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup, or if you touch it with your finger and it feels nice and hot. Now we're going to add this back into the pot, and you can notice how smoothly it's blending in. If we had just dumped the yolk in there without tempering it first, we would have ended up with a pot of scrambled eggs, which is what we don't want. So once you add that in there, stir it in really well, and now you want to let it cook very gently on low heat for another minute. That not only cooks the egg yolk, but you're also going to notice that the pudding will really start to thicken even more. This is a really important secret to getting a nice creamy pudding, and after an extra minute of cooking, you can shut off the heat. Now we're going to take that egg white from earlier and we have to beat it. And normally I like to just whisk this by hand, but I'm feeling a little lazy today, so I'm going to use an electric mixer. Start beating it until soft peaks form, and that's going to take about a minute to a minute and a half. And if your egg white is at room temperature, which it probably will be, this will take a lot less time. So once you see that it kind of looks a bit like whipped cream like this, now you want to take that extra tablespoon of sugar I mentioned earlier and add that in. Now we're going to continue beating this until firm peaks form. That's probably only going to take another minute. And the reason why we added that 4th tablespoon of sugar to the egg whites is because it really does help to stabilize them. So once you have nice firm peaks like this that slightly flop over, now we can slowly start adding this into our hot pudding. Now remember, I did shut off that heat. You don't want your pudding to keep cooking now. So I'm just going to add half at a time, and then you want to just start folding it in. And a lot of people skip this step when they make tapioca pudding, but it's a secret to making it nice and fluffy and light. Plus, it's a really good way to use up that egg white so it doesn't go to waste. This is another tried and true technique that I don't think I've ever seen in another pudding recipe, only for tapioca. And I think when you do this yourself, you're going to notice quite a difference in the texture. So I'm going to go ahead and add that second half of the egg white, but before it's fully folded in, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, which might seem like a lot, but you have to remember that this is pretty much the only real flavor that's in this recipe, because tapioca itself has literally no flavor at all. So be generous with that vanilla. And if you find that your egg white isn't folding in very well with the spatula, go ahead and replace it with a balloon whisk, because I can almost promise you that's going to do the trick. Don't worry if you have a few little bits of unfolded egg white left behind. They're pretty much going to be imperceptible in the end. And speaking of the end, that's all there is to making this tapioca pudding. You can serve it warm like this, but I think it's a lot better chilled. So go ahead and pour this into a serving dish or individual serving dishes, and whatever you do, make sure to cover this with plastic and press it down so that it's touching the surface. That will prevent that leathery skin from forming. So after a few hours of chilling in the fridge, this is what it's going to look like. You can see here that the texture is perfect. It's neither too thick nor too thin. And in my opinion, I think the flavor just gets more enhanced when it's chilled. Just look at that creamy texture. And I never really understood why so many people were reminded of fish eggs when they eat this, because it tastes nothing like that. This is just cool and creamy with a fun texture that kind of resembles a very soft jello. Not unpleasant at all. You can sprinkle on a little cinnamon or nutmeg, or some people like to serve this with a little pureed fruit on top. Or, of course, you could enjoy your tapioca pudding just like this. I personally like to serve this with a little shot of whipped cream and a cherry on top, because I think this is just such a classic look that never gets old. And if you ask me, that looks pretty enough to paint a picture, and I can almost guarantee that one day I will. And even though I don't like saying this, but tapioca pudding is the perfect dessert for the times we're living in today, because it's so economical. And where I live, grocery prices are going through the roof. But you can buy a bag of tapioca pearls for very little money, and they'll last you a long time because a little goes a long way. So go try it and enjoy. Or you might want to try one of these other great pudding recipes.